Have you ever seen the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade? If you have, you've seen the massive balloons that float down Broadway. This is the story of how those balloons were invented and how the parade got started. Let's read it together. Balloons Over Broadway, the true story of the puppeteer of Macy's parades. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarge loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night, he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens had ate their breakfast and Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and string, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes move so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. When Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarge's marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters and attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. In Macy's Wonder Town windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long, they performed for shoppers jostling for a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Tony's were immigrants. And as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees and hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats. And Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day. In 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square, it was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that he decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Each year, the parade grew. But when Macy's brought in lions and tigers in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppet, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down in the streets? Tony knew a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how could Tony make his big puppets move? On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 6 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. But now, the sidewalks were so packed with people that only the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground. And though the sticks helped steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate and to move and gesture more like puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls are above the puppet and the puppet hangs down. But what if the controls were below and the puppet could rise up? During the next year, Tony had his new idea in motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make the balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber but lighter than rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Soon, since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they would deflate and ship back to Tony in New York. Tony didn't know if everything would go as planned. It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose to the sky. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sailed down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet, with every heave-ho, the balloon gestured and articulated like wild puppets on the crowd, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under elm, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wonderland windows. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York City to see the new balloons would rise into the skies from Macy's famous parade. Tony Sarge, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine. And this is the actual sources that they used to make this book. So if you would like to look at those, you can. These are some of the actual articles. So this year on Thanksgiving Day, try to tune in and watch these amazing balloons sail down Broadway.